We are just getting ready to broadcast.
Haha, I'm on mute. No, I apologize. Um, Sorry, I was saying thank you for your patience given the technical difficulties. But we're going to get through this together. So, again, I am excited to be here.
I'm on mute.
And
No, I
my name
apologize.
is Dr. Adanna Kai Jones. I am a woman of African descent. I have short hair that are in braids and are curled. I am wearing huge silver earrings with the Adinkra symbol known as Ginyame, which means accept God in the Akan language of the people of Ghana. So I'm bringing God into the space. I am wearing a blue and black striped hoodie, and I am on the lands of the Wabanaki Confederacy Indigenous people, which is in the state of Maine, the northernmost state on the east coast of the United States. I am happy to be here again, and I'm here to talk about whining, rolling, shaking, jiggling hips and butts. For those of you who read my article, Practicing Jametness, the transmission of bad behavior as a strategy of survival, I am talking about the really integral ways that the Afro-Caribbean rolling hip actually mediates a lot of identity politics, and also, which I didn't get into in the article, but also spiritual politics, and legacies of femininity, legacies of vulgarity, legacies of shame, legacies of pain, legacies of love, legacies of sexuality, legacies of family, of nationalism, of happiness, of sadness, of basically the sense of being human. So it makes you wonder, well, how can the hips, right? How could the circulation of a hip be all of those things? That makes no sense. You know? You're just shaking your butt, right? Not a big deal. But what I've come to realize is that in Africanist practices, the hip area, that is actually the portal between the spiritual world and the human world. I mean, literally, right? In the female body, you're giving birth, right, to another human, right, that has a new spirit that is now entering the world, right? So the importance of that area in Africanist practice, right, is lost within the Western translations of it. And that's the limbo space that we, as folks of African descent and folks whose cultures are influenced by African practices and belief systems, are constantly navigating and negotiating. So let me back up a little bit to say how I got to this as a research topic. So, being that I was born in Trinidad, right, and carnival is big. I know you guys have carnival also. We're always competing with our carnival, who has the best carnival. Trinidad does, but you know, we'll say Brazil does just because I'm in a place where I'm outnumbered. But we associate whining, the dance, with carnival. So for us, it's a moment to celebrate, it's a moment to show the world who you are, to show off, and to like really let loose and be free. And also when you learn to whine is usually when you start playing masquerade, playing mass, playing carnival. And that's around 5. At that point, you're expected to already know how to whine, which means your family should have taught you as soon as you can walk. So the expectation of being able to roll your hips at a very young age is real. And there is so much love and excitement and joy around that process. I can say specifically for me and a lot of the my informants who I interviewed learned from their grandmothers, from their older cousins, family members. A lot of times there would be like family competitions between cousins or brothers and sisters where they would see who can roll their hips the best, see who can go down to the floor and come back up. And, you know, the prize would be sometimes like a quarter or some candy or something cute. But that was like part of the family dynamic, right? You're just dancing, having a good time, you're whining. My grandmother had a song, she said, that she used to sing for my dad. She's like, whine, Gregory, whine like a ball of twine. Whine, Gregory, whine like a ball of twine. And that's how my dad learned how to whine when he was a little kid. So our relationship to it was always around love and family. Then when I came to the United States, there was a lot of shame and secrecy around shaking and whining your hips. They associated with stripper dancing. They associated with something that you don't do in front of your parents, something that you don't do in front of, if you want to be considered a respectable person. And there was a lot of, I would say, gendered inequity, right? So women were expected to shake and really be dexterous, and men were not really expected to shake their hips at all, which in Trinidad, if a man does not know how to whine, that's terrible. Like you cannot even call yourself a Trinidadian if you don't know how to whine. That's how deeply embedded to our culture it was, right? So coming to the United States and men not having to whine and them expecting women to do all the work also was very strange to me. So fast forward, I remember going to Carnival in Barbados, and the way they shook their hips was just slightly different. They would kind of toss it back as opposed to a full circle under yourself. And I start thinking to myself, wow, if I was to close my eyes, I can tell where somebody is from based on how they whine. So I started doing that. I noticed that people from West Africa rolled their hips very differently. People from Jamaica, they would have a more thrusting kind of circular motion. People in Cuba, they would like stomp their foot a little bit as as they roll their hips. And I kept going to all these different places, and I kept seeing these slight differences in how people roll their hips. And then I started to realize, wow, these hips are mediating a lot of identity politics. A lot. I can tell where people are from. I could even tell, at least in Trinidad, if you're of African descent, if you're of East Indian descent, if you're what we call, in Trinidad, what we call white. It may not always translate to white in outside of Trinidad, but what we call white in Trinidad is of European descent, or people who are from the Middle East also. Anyways, there also seemed to be a kind of racialization around how people rolled their hips. So in the imagination of the Trinidadian racial lineup, Black people would roll their hips in this smooth circle. Indian people would have a kind of what they call a thrust to the side. So it'd kind of be like that, as opposed to a full circle for people of African descent. And white folks were just imagined, they just can't do it. They just were out of timing. They, they would just be kind of rolling like this, right? So that kind of was normalized also as like a racial experience. So now we have nationalism, we've got race, we've got gender, all wrapped up into just how somebody is rolling their hips. So, of course, sex is going to be a part of it, right? I'm not going to deny that sex is not a part of it, which is why, again, in the Western translation, especially thinking in relation to religion, there is wanting to deny sexuality as part of the human experience in order to become more godly and more spiritual. But actually, in Africanist practices, right? I'm thinking specifically of Yoruba traditions, right? And traditions in Dahomey, where the deities, the orishas, as you guys know in Condomblé, right? Ask us to embrace our most humanness, which includes our sexuality, right? Our deities promote us feeling all the feelings that this body is gonna allow us to feel. So sex is not about shame. Sex is also not just about one function of giving birth or procreating, but actually it's part of the human experience of understanding who you are, why you are, your full potential, right? And the energies that are there, again, are really navigating your connection between the spiritual world and this human world. So, of course, in Trinidad and places that are, teach whining in this particular way, don't deny that sex isn't a part of it, but it isn't the whole thing. So the way they navigate when a wine is sexual, or when a wine is just about being free and opening yourself, or when it's about family, or when it's about nationalism, when it's about pride, really gets nuanced. So, for example, two brothers can wine with each other, right? But there's like a rule. So they'll wine side by side, next to each other like this. And that lets everybody know, okay, they're brothers, they're family, this is cordial. Let's say two friends, let's say it's a cisgendered woman and a man. And they're just friends. They don't want to have sex with each other. And let's say one wines in front of the other. They might not touch hips. They might just wine without touching hips. for example, right? Let's say a woman wants to have sex with a man. She will whine in a provocative way that she might look back and like look at her butt as she's whining and be playful with him a little bit. I mean, there's multiple ways to do it, but just to say, the way you engage with the other person really tells them your intentions, right? And the relationship that you actually have with that person, right? The way I whine with my mom and my dad and my grandma is not the way that I whine with my husband or a potential lover, for example, or my kid or my nephew or my nieces, right? All of those ways of moving really, really tell somebody who's not part of the dance, oh, they must be friends. Oh, they must be lovers. Oh, there's all this nuance to it. And lastly, age is a part of this mediation. So in Trinidad, we have something called an old man wine, which is a wine that kind of looks like it hurts. So I'll see if I could demonstrate it. But you're usually kind of like, right? So you're rolling your hips as if it takes a lot of energy, a lot of energy to roll that. And even if you're a young person, if you whine in that kind of way, they go like, are you old? Like, does it hurt? Like, why are you whining like that? Right? So there's also a kind of expectation of vitality, in how you whine. So again, we got age written into this. We've got race. We've got nationality. We've got gender. We've got sex and sexuality, all wrapped up into just one motion. So to me, that says, this is a really powerful thing. I can mediate a lot of relationships without even opening my mouth. I can tell people who I am, what I'm doing here, without saying, hello, my name is Dr. Adanna Kai Jones. So when I started to see kind of how embedded the wine is in the Trinidadian culture, but also in Africanist cultures throughout the globe, right? It just mediates different things depending where you go. I was like, I've got to research this. I've got to talk about this, and I've got to bring it to the forefront in a way that it removes it from it being seen as something that is inherently shameful, because the Western world doesn't quite know what to do with it. And I would say this is, since the colonial encounter, they have no idea what to do with this movement. But the fact that it's still here, even after it was outlawed in Trinidad, there was a lot of the Jamet's participation in carnival. A lot of their costumes and a lot of their dancing was deemed as vulgar, and they made a lot of laws that banned it, that said you're not allowed to do that costume. Next year they came up with another costume and shook their hips all the same. So it just goes to show how really deeply integral, right, this movement is to African people's survival. Right? When you're thinking about accessing joy in a time where the world around you is hostile against you. Right? So to back up a little bit, just to say kind of how these values got embedded into the rolling hip, in particular in Trinidad, we have to pay homage. We have to understand that it's because of this class known as the Jamets. And the word Jamet today means it's a bad word. It means whore, right? If you call somebody a jamet, it's like, you know, there's a loose woman or a whore, basically. Because the word was not created by the people who were being called it. It was created by the colonizers. So the colonizers at the time, and this was post-emancipation, so right after they had ended slavery, which was 1938 in Trinidad. All the slaves left the plantation because who's going to stay doing painful, horrible work? I'm not, right? They left the plantation, went to the cities, but the country was not ready to take them on as active citizens. So they didn't have jobs for them. They didn't have houses for them. They didn't have, you know, a route for them to become active citizens. So of course, our Black people are going to come up with ways to exist and to survive, because that's what we do. So a lot of the things that they brought into the space, which included music, drumming, singing, they would have these, there's like a dance fight known as Kalinda. I wouldn't say it's similar to capoeira, but it's along that line in terms of fighting style that looks like you're dancing. This one uses a stick, bamboo, a pua stick, and they, it's also a game of sleight of hand, of like distracting somebody and then kind of attacking. So all of these things kind of became part of how they would gather. So of course the colonizers was like, we're gonna outlaw that. We don't want you to gather. We don't want you to drum. We don't want you to sing. We don't want you to be in our space, right? So then carnival itself became the place where all they would have to express all the things they're not allowed to express outside of carnival. So, and the good thing about carnival is that they didn't have the same consequences. So if I yelled and screamed at a cop during carnival, I wouldn't get arrested because I'm just playing masquerade. If I yelled and screamed at a cop outside of carnival, I would definitely be arrested, right? So in Trinidad, our carnival became a space where protests would happen, right? So not so much in the European sense where it's topsy-turvy. Oh, in real life, I'm rich, so at carnival, I'm poor, or things like that. But rather, in real life, I can't tell you how I really feel about this thing. I can't advocate for myself. I am oppressed in the most intimate and mundane ways. Like, I don't even have ownership of my body as a Black woman. Specifically, for example, if a police officer can have you arrested for being a prostitute, whether you are a prostitute or not. So you don't even actually have to be a prostitute. They might want a favor from you and you could say no, and they can say, okay, you're a prostitute, you're gonna be arrested. And at that time, to be arrested as a prostitute meant you also had to get venereal disease checks by gynecologists, which was extremely violent against women at that time, extremely painful. And again, with the racist belief that Black women didn't feel pain, it was very commonplace to have this kind of power dynamic, right? So again, if in real life I don't even control how my body is seen, carnival then becomes a place where I tell you, right? I could, my body is this, it's mine, you know? I could exaggerate it. They have costumes called the Dame Lorraine, where she would have huge breasts and a huge butt, and she would shake it in front of them. She was known as the fancy woman, so she was an aristocrat, high class, but also very voluptuous, and she used it to taunt onlookers, right? In that sense, the use of taunting then became a tool, a strategy to make the onlooker, which would be at that point, the aristocrat, the colonizer, feel bad about looking at my breasts and looking at my boobs, right? Like, I'm having the time of my life, but you get to feel the shame now. So now I've shifted who is feeling shameful about my body. There was another costume known as the baby doll, and she would dress as a baby doll, but she would also have a baby, and she would go to the onlookers, men, and ask them for money and tell them, hey, why aren't you taking care of your child? How dare you leave your child and not take care of your child? You owe me a lot of money, what we would call, child support today, right? Then it'd be like, you owe me money for this child to take care of this child. And she would shame them to actually give them money. So she would actually walk away with money in her hands because of that taunting, right? So in that moment, again, she's shifting who wears the burden of shame, right? Because outside of carnival, it's the mother's fault that she's impregnated by this colonizer or this aristocrat, right? But during carnival, she gets to say, no, you get to wear some of this shame right now. This is not my burden, right? You're the one who showed up also, and you need to pay for it. So again, carnival was and the movements that she would do again would be these hip thrusts, right? And this kind of taunting and shaking of the hip area, in addition to other things with the baby doll, of course. So and I just want to say one more costume that I think was also integral to how whining is used as a strategy for shifting power dynamics. Got it. Okay, got 5 more minutes. Last thing is that this costume known as, it's in French, so you might not be able to translate it well, but it's called XII, which means bed shitter. Piss en lit, which means bed wetter, like somebody who pees the bed. And pisse du sangre, which means the menstruator, like, a woman menstruates blood. So these 3 costumes were one of the costumes that were outlawed. And these 3 costumes also had these thrusting, shaking, hip movements that were used to taunt the onlookers. They would smell. So they would smell like poop, they would smell like pee, they would smell like sulfur on purpose. They would exaggerate body parts with the fighting sticks that I told you about from the Kalinda people, or with drums to kind of exaggerate male member parts. And they use this to really just allow them to have space. Because if you smell and you're disgusting, like, nobody really wants to be around you. So you get to take up as much space as you want, right? And you get to say, yeah, my body does these things. It's gross, and I'm still here. So what? You deal with it. You deal with my body doing these bodily things, right? So again, it became, in this kind of topsy-turvy way, a space to really shift how power was being experienced and how power was being navigated and negotiated at that time. And we, as people from Trinidad who participate in Carnival, inherited a lot of those values. Now, how we perform it is very different than how they perform it, but the value, right? The value of it, the fact that it's something that you can use to shift something from shameful to prideful, right? Again, is like very much indebted to the Jamet's performance at Carnival in the late 19th century. So I will stop there because I know you have tons of questions. Yeah.
É, muito obrigada, Adanna. É sempre muito bom ouvir você falar. Muito obrigada pela essa trajetória histórica desse rebolado caribenho, né? Eu acho que as pessoas que estão em casa gostaram muito. Eu queria, como eu conheço um pouco da sua pesquisa, eu queria falar um pouco mais, que você falasse dessas diferenças dos embates das polícias. Você falou bastante dentro de Trinidad, no Caribe, mas você também tem muita experiência desses embates dos dançarinos de carnaval, lá em Nova York, por exemplo, né, nos carnavais por exemplo, de Londres e de Nova York, né? E eu queria que você falasse rapidamente dessas estratégias, dessas brincadeiras e desses confrontos, né? Porque a gente sabe que os negros continuam sendo mortos pelas polícias brancas, e aí rola essa inversão de valores, né? Que essa sexualidade extrema, a gente pode pensar que é uma forma de agredir também o policial ou os sistemas, né? Eu queria que você falasse como que é essa experiência de fazer o whining nesses centros do norte global.
Yes. I mean, that's a lot. I should also say the state of being black, honestly, because of how black as a concept, as a race, not people who are from Africa. So I just want to really separate that, right? So black as a political identity that was forced onto people who didn't speak the same language, didn't come from the same parts of Africa, right? And have different belief systems, right? Right. These colonizers said, oh, you're all the same. You're all this one thing called black. That was a violent, violent imposition. So the state of blackness is always already about violence. And that we have never quite been able to disassociate ourselves from it, because the politics of blackness itself is a violent politic. From the violence needed to justify why they should be slaves, the violence needed to justify why this is a criminal activity and not that thing that white person is doing. That's not a criminal activity, but this thing that you're doing, that's a criminal activity. Like I said, in Trinidad, the stick fighting was deemed as criminal activity. Kalinda, comes from this tradition of fighting and dancing and playfulness. On the outside looking in, you're like, oh my God, they hate each other, they're fighting each other, they want to kill each other. And a little bit they do, and a little bit it's about upping the ante so that you're better, right? So it's like, I'm gonna come with my A game, you come with your A game, and we're gonna make each other better, because we're gonna constantly challenge each other to keep upping our game. Because the point is survival. The point is to get out of this terrible situation. So you can't be mediocre. You've got to be really good, right? And you've got to be able to do it in a world that doesn't want you to do it. So how can you be sneaky about doing it? So that's how a lot of these masquerades kind of also included these hidden elements of Kalinda, right? With the, like I said, the Pistu song and the XII and the Pistu, the bedwetter. They would hide their fighting weapons in their costumes, right? And when they met each other on the streets, like two opposing, what we might call gangs, but two opposing groups, then they would square off. And again, it was a game of sleight of hands, of trickery, of, it's not just, oh, I'm gonna punch you in the face. No, it's about wit, right? And it's about skill, and it's about really trying to outdo the other one in a trickster way, right? Not to kind of be blunt, brute, and just kind of bloody the scene, but rather, beat them at their own game without them even knowing that it happened, right? Is kind of the trick. So just to say how Kalinda worked, but then to talk about, violence literally in the diasporan carnivals, like in New York. Since I started researching, every year there's a shooting, or if there is a shooting that's not actually linked to the carnival at all, it gets linked to the carnival, right? It's like, oh, all these Black people came together, and of course there's a shooting. And then you're like, well, that was like all the way over there. I mean, yes, there was a shooting, but it wasn't because of the carnival, So that kind of assumption became also very regular, even in London, where there's this constant association. Black people gather, there's going to be some kind of violence. So we're going to prepare for it. All to say is that in New York specifically, there's a lot of police, like sometimes 3,000 police officers, right? And they line up, they basically become a barrier between the people who are looking and the people who are playing masquerade. And in Trinidad, that's not really a thing. The line gets blurred a lot. I mean, there is a rope. There's a rope that says you paid money to be in this band, and that person outside the rope didn't pay money to be in the band. But you can move in and out easily of that rope, wine with people, dance with people, drink with people. They can be a part of the spectatorship for a minute and not, that blurring that line is very easy. But in New York specifically, you kind of have to do a lot of work to blur that line. So a lot of masqueraders would actually whine against the police officers, like push their hips up against the police officers, and like literally make space so that they move, and it kind of opens up that barrier. So a lot of times you'll see that literally happening. And I should note, one time in 2011, I believe, a police officer was caught on tape, and he was having too much fun whining. And then the next year, they kind of put out a mandate, the Department of Police, that, police officers should not indulge in whining during the carnival. So they had to like stand there like robots, really not participating in the carnival, which I thought was a very, again, US-centered way to respond, right? Deny pleasure, because that's bad. It's going to lead to bad things.
Isso. Nós temos uma outra pergunta, porque você falou dessas formas de repressão, né? Aqui no Brasil, a gente também tem essa paixão pelos movimentos do quadril, mas, ao mesmo tempo, nós temos uma colonização muito repressora. E essa repressão, às vezes, se dá através do balé, porque o movimento do quadril no balé é aquele movimento que endurece o quadril, que encaixa. E eu queria que você falasse um pouco disso, como que as práticas de dança também podem ser práticas repressoras.
Are you saying, like, in practicing, because there's these like kind of colonial implications written onto the hip, also like doing it, sometimes you do feel the shame and the bad? Is that what you're saying?
Por exemplo, né, durante muito tempo no Brasil, a palavra dançar ela é relacionada com essa questão de dançar o balé. Então, se o quadril ficasse desencaixado, que ficasse rebolando, então você não estaria dançando da maneira correta, você estaria dançando de uma maneira errada. Então, essa imposição de quais movimentos o quadril pode fazer, que vai ser considerado bonito, certo, ético, às vezes é pensado como uma forma de repressão.
Right. And that comes from, I don't even know how to untangle that without, you know, that's the Western way of thinking where, movement, right, can be separated from like the human experience, for example. And it's about getting the technique, right? And the technique is what gets you to correctness, right? Not the process or the learning or the community or the rhythms that brought it, or the full picture of it, right? No, it's about this very specific understanding of what a perfect body should look like and what a perfect body should move like. And of course, it's not a black body, right? So that tradition, which is not particular to Brazil, I should also say, right? It's not particular to Brazil. Like throughout the Caribbean, also, I know L'Antoinette, for example, who's a scholar, a dance scholar in Jamaica, talks about this, where she's like, the dance. She does it in that accent to be funny, but the dance versus dancing, you know? And she's like, what the common folks do, right, is not considered legitimate dancing. What they do on the stage, right, that's considered legitimate dancing. But that doesn't represent the people's experience, right? It represents the colonizers' experience, right? And because they're in power, they're the ones who have the world believing that actually, yes, what happens on the stage, that's legitimate, and everything else doesn't count.
Eu queria fazer uma pergunta.
Oh, I don't know that question.
Porque é o seguinte, aqui os quadris das mulheres, e principalmente...
Alô? Fazendo uma última pergunta, então, Adanna, gostaria de... você falou um pouco dessa questão do quadril como forma de cura, como conexão ancestral, né? Mas, ao mesmo tempo, nós temos essa exploração do quadril nas mídias sociais, seja em vídeos,
Cristina,
né?
eu posso perguntar, posso fazer uma pergunta, Cristina?
Pode, por favor. Eu não sabia que você tinha entrado e saído. Pode fazer, por favor.
Não, eu queria saber que aqui as mulheres, principalmente da Bahia, que é 85% da população preta, né, depois de Lagos, né, da África, do continente africano, né, nós somos 85%, quase 100%, né, de população preta. As mulheres recebem muito menos, né, que os homens, enfim. Mas os quadris, elas... eu não sei qual é a pergunta, mas assim, que as mulheres pretas no Brasil, não só as mulheres pretas, mas os quadris no Brasil representam não, nós somos o diabo nos quadris. Então, eu queria saber essa coisa da África que veio lá para Tobago, Trinidad Tobago, e para cá, ou para Cuba, que é a diáspora, né? Então, assim, essa coisa dos quadris é a diáspora? A África em diáspora? Essa é a pergunta.
Okay, I don't fully understand, but I'll start talking based on keywords that I heard. You mentioned something about the devil in the hips. And I have to say that I want to say simply yes. Because there's a lot of power in Trinidad, for example, but also throughout the continent of Africa. It is understood that the hips hold a lot of power, right? Whether it's good, whether it's bad, that's up for interpretation. But it can do things and produce things in like in the human realm and in the spiritual realm and in between. And I say it like that because, for example, if we think about Shango, the Orishas Shango, or we think about Oshun, or we think about Yemaya, right? Their hips are extremely powerful. Like in Cuba, the dances bring the thunder and lightning down to Shango's hips, and his hips holds all of that energy, right? We think about Oshun and her billowing hips, right? As she prepares the space for love. And the energy of love itself, right, is tremendous. Again, being held in her hips. And we think about Jemaya, right, who is basically Mother Earth, right, birth many of the other rishas and also is giving us permission to birth, right, more humans. Again, is holding all of that ocean energy in her hips. So if I was a colonizer looking at that, I'd be
Adanna, eu sou filho de Oxum, uma das esposas de Xangô. Mas eu sou homem.
Yes. And I can't hear you anymore.
Eu sou filho de Oxum, mas eu sou homem.
But that's okay. That's not, I mean, in the Western world that might be weird, but like that makes complete sense in the logical condomblé. Like, yes.
No, it's not. It's not candomblé. It's not candomblé. It's voodoo. I can't speak
And Santeria.
My mind is very blocked to speak English. But Xangô, Oxum, é a mesma coisa do ser humano, do quadril, que é a tua especificidade.
Desculpa, Luiz.
I don't understand.
Nós vamos ter que encerrar. Nós já passamos um pouco mais do tempo. Então, Adanna, eu gostaria, em nome da escola de dança...
Não, mas eu quero falar que ela tem um diabo no quadril.
Sim, ela entendeu o que você falou, mas o que ela quis dizer é que, para ela, pessoalmente, não é positivo.
Yeah, but just to say, the devil in the hips is not inherently, like, that's...
No, not devil. But I'm black. I'm not right. I'm black. I'm black body. I am black body. My mind thinks black.
Bom, então eu gostaria de me desculpar. Eu acho que a conversa está muito quente e maravilhosa, e eu gostaria de passar o resto da minha tarde com você, Adanna. Eu não quero falar muito, mas talvez tenha uma chance que a Adanna estará conosco, então talvez nós teremos a Adanna ao vivo e a cores no ano que vem. Eu gostaria de tomar essa oportunidade para simplesmente agradecer a todos, agradecer a Adanna, agradecer aqui aos nossos tradutores de Libra, aos nossos tradutores do inglês para o português. Foi uma tarde fantástica, e amanhã continuaremos. Temos mais 2 apresentações incríveis. Boa tarde a todos.
Thank you. You guys are amazing. I appreciate all of the interpreters. Obrigada.